The doll suddenly came to life. A child's voice played. "Emily, thank you. He's gone." Then came the sound of an old carousel fading into silence. But what happened next will shock even the most skeptical. First, let's go back to the beginning. It began with a whisper. Not the ghostly kind, but the kind born in middle school hallways and passed between locker slams and whispered dares. "You won't do it," one of them had said. "The place is cursed." That was enough. On the last Friday of summer, with the dusk still warm and the sky the color of burnt copper, 7 children climbed through a slit in the rusting chain-link fence that surrounded the old Lambrook grounds. The Carnival had appeared like a mirage in 1996. No advertising, no opening date. One morning, its striped tents and faded signage simply existed, thrown across the edge of Crestfall's old rail yard like forgotten laundry. By the time anyone thought to ask where it came from, 2 workers were dead. The carousel had burned to its iron bones, and the entire carnival vanished overnight. It left behind scorched earth, a few rusted bolts, and a town that no longer wanted to remember. But kids are different. What adults call trauma, kids turn into myth. To the group, Lucas, bold and brash, their de facto leader. Melody, his sharp-eyed second-in-command. The identical twins, Carter and Caleb, mischievous to the bone. Lila, quieter, watchful. Jordan, the peacemaker. And Cassie, the tag-along sister no one had the heart to leave behind. The carnival wasn't a wound. It was a challenge. They brought flashlights, snacks, a camera with a cracked lens. They joked as they crawled under the jagged hole in the fence, sneakers crunching on gravel and shards of glass. The air changed the moment they stepped inside. Colder, heavier. Even the insects seemed to hold their breath. A collapsed tent still fluttered slightly in the wind, though the air was still. They found the carousel skeleton, its paint scorched black, its horses slumped like dying animals. And then, nothing. The night swallowed them. By sunrise, the only sign they'd ever been there were 5 shoes, all mismatched, a trail leading nowhere. And a balloon, red and defiant, still bobbing gently where the carousel once turned. The stuffed monkey was the worst. Eyes melted, mouth locked in a scream-shaped grin. The police scoured the site. Dogs caught no scent. Helicopters circled fruitlessly. And the town of Crestfall, so used to burying strange stories under concrete and silence, did the same with this one. The case froze in time, sealed in dusty folders and unreturned phone calls. But the parents never moved on. They aged, yes, and some even remarried, but none ever stopped looking. Not really. Because somewhere deep inside, in the place grief sharpens into certainty, they knew their children weren't gone. They were taken. By the time Dean Hadley let the truth slip from his withering mouth, his voice had thinned to a rasp, brittle as the oxygen tubes winding across his bed. The man who once held a badge and swore to uphold justice now lay surrounded by monitors and the slow, merciless rhythm of an ending life. Guilt had eroded him more than cancer ever could. He'd kept the box buried, figuratively and literally, for 27 years, sealed inside a crawl space beneath his garage, beneath years of denial, whiskey bottles, and nightmares that never left. The box was small, battered, its metal corners rusted and the latch barely holding. But its contents carried the weight of 7 vanished lives. Among yellowed newspaper clippings, a broken pair of binoculars, and a map of the carnival grounds marked with red X's, sat a single object, a child's toy, grotesquely cheerful in its decay. Shaped like a doll, it had the soft plastic face of a toddler's companion, molded to smile, but the smile had warped in heat, giving it a melted leer. One glass eye remained, cloudy and staring. The other socket gaped empty, filled with dust. The voice recorder embedded in its torso was outdated, possibly custom-built. Hadley claimed he found it at the site the day after the children disappeared. Claimed he'd taken it home thinking it was evidence, but something about it had terrified him enough to hide it instead of report it. That admission would have sparked outrage, if not for what came next. When Tex connected the recorder to an external power source, its internal battery long dead, a static buzz filled the room. Then came the voices. Each scream was different. Some were frantic, others muffled by sobs. But each bore the unmistakable timbre of a young child's panic. 7 voices, 7 names burned into the hearts of grieving parents and half-forgotten headlines. There was no background noise, no wind, no echo of surroundings, just pure, unfiltered terror. Then, silence. A pause long enough to draw breath and forget. Then, we're still here. The sound didn't just disturb, it wounded. Hardened officers sat motionless. One detective dropped his pen. A younger officer wept silently, tears tracking down her cheeks before she even realized they'd begun to fall. The recording didn't just reopen a case. It cracked something open, in the precinct, in the town, and in the public psyche. For the first time in nearly 3 decades, the myth of the Lambrook Carnival became real again. Not a ghost story, not a cautionary tale whispered in schoolyards, but a case, a living wound. And someone, somewhere, had left that recorder as a trail marker, a breadcrumb, leading straight into darkness. Emily Reyes wasn't the kind of investigator who wore her grief like a badge, but it lived beneath her skin, etched into every sleepless night and every case she took. Her brother, Tomas, had disappeared from a county fair in Nebraska in 1995. Same summer, same eerie silence afterward. His case, like the 7 from Crestfall, had gone cold so quickly it felt deliberate. The coincidence haunted her like a recurring fever. So when she heard about the voice recorder found near the Lambrook grounds, her reaction wasn't shock. It was a pulse of rage. Familiar. Focused. She arrived in Crestfall with a single duffel, a steel coffee mug, and folders thick with case notes no one else had wanted to read. Her methods had long since bled over from procedural to obsessive. She wasn't hired, she inserted herself. And to her surprise, the families didn't push back. Grief recognizes its own. The parents welcomed her with tired eyes and brittle smiles, if they welcomed her at all. Most were hollowed out by decades of not knowing. Some had tried to rebuild lives, only for guilt to rot the foundations. Others had dissolved completely. Caleb and Carter's father now lived alone in a trailer outside of town. Jordan's mother kept an untouched room with fresh sheets every week. Melody's aunt, who'd adopted her after her parents' divorce, hadn't spoken a full sentence in years. But it was Helen Rourke, Lucas's mother, who haunted Emily the most. She still lived across the 2-lane road from the field, a house locked in time, with floral wallpaper peeling like old memories. Helen never left. She sat on her porch every night with a thermos of chamomile tea and eyes fixed on the empty lot. "I hear it sometimes," she murmured, voice barely more than breath. "The music. That tinkling thing. What's it called?" "A calliope?" Emily asked. Helen nodded, fingers tightening around the thermos. "It's faint, but it's real. Not like a memory, like something trying to crawl back up." Emily didn't roll her eyes or suggest medication. She believed in the irrational because she had lived it. She had heard her brother's voice in dreams she didn't remember having. That night, with a fleece blanket and a portable recorder, she lay in the weeds beside the fence line, watching the stars turn above the cracked midway. At 2:11 a.m., the air trembled. A melody slithered through the dark, slow, broken, metallic, like music echoing through rusted pipes. A calliope, off-tune and sour, dragged across the windless sky. Emily rose, flashlight in hand, and followed the sound past splintered booths and withered banners until she found it. An overturned popcorn cart, its wheels fused to the ground with rust and time. Beneath it, half swallowed by soil and roots, was a square of iron. Her beam caught a hinge, a handle, a trap door. The iron door groaned open like something waking from a decades-long coma, its hinges shrieking as rust crumbled into the air. The scent that rose from below was dense, earthy, metallic, laced with mold and the stale sweetness of decayed fabric. Emily Reyes stood at the top of the spiral staircase, her flashlight catching only a narrow sliver of what lay beneath. She didn't hesitate. The officers behind her exchanged glances but followed. The stairs curved down like a helix into silence. At the bottom, the space opened into something far larger than expected. It wasn't a storage cellar nor a break room. It was a theater. The walls were brick, bowed and sweating with groundwater, but lined with booths built from rotting plywood and curling paint. Velvet curtains, now moth-eaten and black with mildew, draped over arched frames that mimicked ticket stalls. Above them, faded signs in gilded lettering read, "The Laughing Tent," "Watch Them Dance," and "Life in Miniature." From the ceiling dangled marionettes, dozens of them, limp and gray with dust, suspended by wires that vanished into the darkness above. Their painted eyes, once cartoonishly bright, had blistered and cracked, giving each one an expression of blind, silent agony. Some were missing limbs. Others had mouths stuck open mid-scream, teeth whittled into unnatural points. Emily's light passed over one puppet whose dress bore 7 tiny stitched hearts, each pierced with a sewing needle. But it was the mirrors that disturbed the most. Affixed at strange angles along the walls, their surfaces were warped and irregular. But something more was wrong. When the group walked past, reflections lagged just behind them, a hesitation that made even the seasoned officers pull back. One mirror showed nothing at all. Another flashed with static like a screen. In the center of the room stood a grotesque centerpiece, a mechanical clown, its body fused with the rusted body of a phonograph horn where its mouth should be. As Emily stepped into range, it jerked to life, joints cracking with ancient effort. The horn let out a shrill burst of static, then played the now familiar screams, each child's voice clearer than the last time she'd heard it. One by one, then the same whisper, "We're still here." Beneath that abomination was a row of lockers, institutional gray, dented and streaked with something brown that had long dried. Each locker bore a pair of hand-scrawled initials, LR, MS, CW, CW, LF, JR, CR. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She knew them. Everyone in Crestfall did. The initials of the missing children. She pried one open. Inside, on a single shelf, were 7 paper masks, cheap, fragile, and yellowed with time. Each bore a name, written in a child's unsteady hand. Crayon, maybe. Faded, but legible. Lucas, Melody, Carter, Caleb, Lila, Jordan, Cassie. Every mask wore the same expression, wide smile, hollow eyes. As the investigation deepened, the Carnival's paper trail proved to be an illusion. A bureaucratic ghost, the Lambrook Traveling Carnival had no tax ID, no vendor registration, no permits on record in Crestfall or the surrounding counties. Every road led to silence. Performers' names listed in archived flyers matched no known census data. Suppliers and food vendors recalled nothing. It was as if the carnival had never officially existed, or worse, as if it had chosen to leave no footprints. but in the dim alcoves of the Crestfall Public Library, buried beneath crumbling county records and forgotten newsletters, someone had been collecting dots long before anyone knew there were lines to draw. Clara Whitman, the town's reclusive head librarian, had spent decades chasing stories dismissed as folklore, oddities, missing persons, unexplained disappearances at traveling fairs throughout the Midwest. She invited Emily to the archive room and handed her a brittle, leather-bound journal with a trembling hand. The cover read, "The Preservation of Innocence, S.T." The journal, dated between 1926 and 1932, was written in careful cursive, alternating between theatrical musings and something closer to ritual doctrine. It described a philosophy twisted into conviction, that the voices of children, uncorrupted by age, carried a kind of sacred resonance. Their laughter, their cries, even their silence, all were holy vibrations that could be distilled, captured, and preserved in physical mediums. Gramophones, wax cylinders, and eventually, dolls. The author, Silas Thorne, detailed his performances across county lines, private shows, never publicized, where he claimed to liberate children from aging by extracting and embedding their voices into handcrafted puppets of memory. Newspaper records confirmed the man existed. Thorne had been arrested in 1932 after authorities found 7 mute children backstage at a county fair near Joliet, Illinois. Each clutched a toy and could not, or would not, speak. Before he could stand trial for child endangerment and suspected abuse, Thorne escaped from a prison transport van that mysteriously crashed en route to court. His body was never recovered. The press moved on. Most people forgot. But forensic audio engineers at Quantico didn't forget. When they isolated the vocal signature on the recovered doll's recorder and compared it to digitized versions of Thorne's surviving wax acts, grotesque vaudeville routines archived by collectors of antique stage horror, the patterns matched. Down to the acoustic fingerprint, decades apart, different medium, same voice print. Emily stared at the waveform analysis, bile rising in her throat. It was impossible. And yet, there it was. Not just an echo from history, but a precise, deliberate resonance. If it was Thorne, he hadn't just returned. He had evolved. The medium changed. The ritual remained. He didn't just steal their voices, he had stolen time itself. The call came in at 2:03 a.m. No number, no trace, just a voice, cracked and ragged with age or fear. It whispered 3 words that didn't just jolt Emily Reyes awake, but stopped her breath mid-cycle. "Lila is alive." The name struck like a tuning fork against the center of her chest. Lila Foster, 10 years old when she vanished, small for her age, known for drawing intricate circus animals on her school notebooks. A child swallowed whole by myth, now dragged into reality by the trembling voice of a ghost caller. Within 48 hours, Emily was on a plane to eastern Pennsylvania, her mind a storm of doubt and possibility. The facility in question sat hidden in the Blue Ridge foothills, cloistered and private, the kind of place that handled what the world wanted to forget: the broken, the voiceless, the misfiled. No one knew exactly who had committed the patient known as Jane Doe No. 621, but she had arrived in 2001, disoriented, speechless, her palms blistered, her scalp patchy with burns. She had never spoken, never reacted to touch, but she drew. Spirals, masks, rooms with one-way mirrors, crude puppets dangling from invisible strings. Emily stood behind the 2-way glass, staring at her. The woman on the other side was small, slight, almost childlike in posture. Pale skin like tissue paper, wide eyes that flinched at sudden movement. She didn't look older than 16, though the chart said she should have been in her late 30s. Time had not touched her in the way it touched others. It had paused her, as if she'd been frozen in amber and only recently thawed. A mouth swab and a rush-order DNA test shattered any doubts. The results came back indisputable. Jane Doe was Lila Foster. The hospital granted trauma therapy access under court order. Emily sat with Lila in silence for days. No coaxing worked. No visual cues triggered recognition. Until the tape was played. The doll's recorder. That final whisper. We're still here. Lila's fingers twitched. Her pupils contracted. And slowly, a memory surfaced like a body rising from black water. Her drawings changed. She began to scrawl seats behind mirrors, silhouettes watching silently from the shadows. Shows, she eventually wrote shakily on a sheet of paper. He made us perform. If we didn't, he took us. Took them, Lila conveyed, not like kidnapping, but like erasing. Some children had disobeyed, and the clown, the phonograph clown, would come. A metal arm would reach down. There'd be a scream, and then silence. That child's voice would later play from a doll's chest, hollow and wrong. Lila had fled during the fire, a blaze she hadn't caused, but which gave her a window. She'd made it above ground, blinded by smoke and sound, only to be hit by a car on the nearby road. No ID, no memory. Just the name Cassie, mumbled once in sleep, long forgotten until now. The survivor had returned, but survival came at a terrible cost. She carried the silence of the others in her throat. It began with a name buried inside an obscure collector's registry, a niche forum for acoustic historians and antique phonograph restorers. Among its members, one stood out. Dr. Victor Marlowe, once a celebrated acoustics engineer at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, later a reclusive figure in the high-end collector's circuit. Marlowe's specialty was voice preservation, analog sound embedded in wax, wire, shellac, and eventually vinyl-fused polymer. But his obsession, it turned out, was not academic. It was pathological. Cross-referencing event appearances and auction receipts, Emily Reyes followed the digital trail to a modest estate outside Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. From the outside, the house looked benign. Colonial revival, white shutters, a stone walkway trimmed with rose hedges. Inside, it was another world. The foyer smelled faintly of talcum and lacquer. Every wall bore dolls, porcelain, plastic, rag-stuffed, arranged in symmetrical formations like museum exhibits, all facing outward, all smiling. None blinked. The raid was swift. Warrants in hand, federal agents and local law enforcement descended on the property. Most of the house was meticulously maintained, but the true heart of the operation lay below. The basement was soundproofed, lined with cork and velvet to dampen reverberation. The floor was cool concrete, scuffed with wear patterns. In the far corner, hidden behind a faux wall, they discovered the lab. The air down there was different, not just musty, but alive with vibration. At the center stood a half-disassembled phonograph rigged to a control board of Marlowe's own design. It was connected to a display cabinet of dolls, no more than 20 total. But 7 had crude labels on their torsos, each marked with a pair of initials: LR, MS, CW, CW, LF, JR, CR. The children. The lost 7. Sound engineers were brought in immediately. Using spectral audio analysis, they dissected the recordings embedded inside each doll. The layers went deep. First, the shrieks, identical to the ones on the recovered recorder. But beneath those, buried like sediment, were fragments of sentences. One doll whimpered, "I want to go home, Mama." Another whispered a lullaby from a Crestfall kindergarten graduation. A third cried, He said if I sang, I could see the sky again. Each voice matched archival samples from the children's home videos, confirmed through biometric analysis. It was not mimicry. These were the original voices, preserved, compressed, distorted through whatever machine Marlowe had built. Confronted with the evidence, Marlowe offered no denial. His explanation was clinical, almost proud. "I didn't take them," he said. "I saved them. Time decays everything. Voices most of all. I preserved the essence. My improvements ensured they wouldn't fade." When pressed about Silas Thorne, Marlowe simply tilted his head and smiled. "Thorne was primitive. He played with wax. I use polymer. His goal was spirit. Mine is permanence." He was arrested without resistance, but the air in the room felt colder when he left, as if something unseen had been disturbed. And then came the playback. The final composite file from the dolls was decrypted, isolated, and played aloud in the soundproof lab. What emerged stunned even the most seasoned agents. Not just because it was clear, not just because it was real, but because someone, or something, spoke back. It was meant to be the end of a nightmare, a final act of disclosure, conducted in the full light of day and beamed across the world through polished news anchors and high-definition feeds. The dolls had been transferred to a secure federal lab in Quantico, each cradled in shockproof foam and tagged not with serial numbers, but names. The ones the public had come to know as more than victims. Lucas, Melody, Carter, Caleb, Lila, Jordan, Cassie. Children, frozen in time. Symbols, wounds that bled across generations. The operation was methodical. Sound engineers, linguists, and forensic psychologists gathered behind layers of security glass. The objective: decode the remaining layers of audio and determine the mechanism by which these voices had been embedded, and perhaps recover something more. Each doll was calibrated, its voice core-linked to advanced spectrum analyzers. The team began with Jordan's doll, progressing through each in order, parsing the static, separating frequencies. There were fragments, syllables, gasps, half-spoken memories, but nothing coherent. Until the 7th, until Cassie. It happened during a lull. No input, no commands. Just a brief pause while the technicians recalibrated the signal dampeners. The lab had gone quiet, save for the ambient hum of machines and the distant whine of cooling fans. Then Cassie's doll spoke. Not a shriek, not a glitch. A child's voice, unmistakably real. Soft with exhaustion but ringing clear. "Emily, thank you. He's gone now." The words cracked through the room like a rupture in reality. The lab froze. For several seconds, no one moved. Then came the carousel, faint, ghostly, winding down in slow metallic notes like a toy running out of wind. The melody warbled and ended. Immediately after, all 7 dolls went silent. Not muted, inert. Their internal devices failed to respond. The audio drives, when extracted, showed signs of spontaneous degradation, as if whatever had once animated them had departed. The public response was a mixture of awe and disbelief. Some called it closure. Others called it fraud. But for the families, it was something else entirely. A funeral with voices. At dusk, beneath a low autumn sky, they gathered at the old Lambrook grounds. The field was still barren, scarred by time and memory. Emily Reyes placed the dolls gently in a circle where the carousel once turned. Around them, candles flickered in hundreds of hands. Survivors, neighbors, even strangers who had followed the case for years. No words were spoken. There were none left. Emily didn't stay long after. She declined interviews, turned down offers for books and documentaries. Within weeks, she was gone. No forwarding address, no social media, no trace. Just a name etched quietly in the minds of those who believed she had done something sacred. And yet, Crestfall remains uneasy. Children still dare each other to sneak near the fence at night. Old folks say you can feel the air change around the place, like breath being held. And when the wind shifts just right, curling through the broken trees and scattered stones, some say they hear it. Laughter. Light, fleeting, and far too young. And a carousel, turning one last time.